Righty, g'day guys. Tom here from Origin Initiative, and this is the first of this type of presentation that I've done so far. This is going to be a bit of a new format for me. I've done some stories on Insta and Facebook and whatnot, letting you guys know that this is the direction I want to go with the Origin Initiative. Now, remember, for me, this is a business. This is what I do to make a living for my family. However, I also don't believe that putting what I have to offer behind some sort of paywall and not giving to people what they need is the ethical thing to do. So yes, I am promoting the speaking gigs and some of the other services I'm going to offer later on. But what I want to do is sort of combine the advertising, so to speak, for the speaking gigs, but also give you guys a bit more of an in-depth understanding of where my head goes in some of these topics and some of the things you could expect if you want me to go and speak to people, for example, or some of the workshops that I want to run in the future. So this is the first of such videos. Now, this is a reasonably basic version of what I normally do. I've normally got a few more images, some like graphs and a few things like that to display a few more things. There's a bit more showmanship, etc. It's difficult to do sitting here behind a camera at my desk. But anyway, long story short, this is the first one. So let's dig into it. So the first topic I've chosen is the experience, belief, behavior paradigm, if you want to call it that. Now, if you were to break down all of psychology into its essential steps, and this is what psychology is, right? Minus a few funnies like some acute psychiatric illnesses, for example. This is essentially it. You're going to have experiences in life, particularly early experiences in childhood, but definitely later on in life. And you are going to then form beliefs based off those experiences, because it's hard not to, especially if they're very big and acute experiences, or if they're chronic and they've occurred a lot of times in your life, whether it's childhood or later on. And that's particularly relevant for those of you in the military first responder world. And then those beliefs, the way you believe that the world is and that the way you are, is what dictates how you interact with the world and how you then behave, particularly with other people. So let's have a little look at what that means, right? Let's go to the first one, and that's childhood. Now, a lot of the people I speak to through the course of my business, whether it be the speaking presentations themselves or some of the one-on-one sort of work that I do, and I don't take clients on, I more mean like just people that I'd like to help through the course of my business. Childhood is one of the most significant and one of the most underrated things that we in this community think about and talk about. Because we're all the big, bad, tough men and women who can do these jobs that other people can't do, but we often forget that there's that vulnerable part of ourselves that we left behind years and years ago. And that person, that child that you've left behind, whether it's on purpose or just in the course of growing up, holds a lot of that emotional stock that you've got now that formulates your beliefs and that dictates the behaviors. So I want to go into that a little bit and give you an idea about what that might look like. So I want to start with a quote, and I think it's important that this is such an old quote and it's so unbelievably accurate, but it's from Aristotle. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher, and he says, "Give me the boy until 7 and I'll show you the man." So even back then, 2,000 plus years ago, before the advent of modern psychology, these guys knew the significance and the impact of childhood. Now, the fact that they can get that accurate to about 7 years is pretty incredible. And obviously that's through years and years of observation. But in modern day psychology, they reckon it's about 8, roughly about 8, when most of your personality and your beliefs and you who you are psychologically is set at about the age of 8. So the fact that that's such ancient, timeless wisdom should be an indicator to you that maybe that's an area you need to go and look at in your life, particularly if things are starting to fall apart for you. So let's have a little look at some of what I've found so far with my clients and the people that I speak to through the course of my business. This is a very typical childhood for our kind of people, particularly those of us who've been through a very acute crisis, whether it's depression, anxiety, PTSD, brushes with suicide, identity crisis, those sort of things. Now, obviously things like violence, probably a little bit rarer, but still prevalent is some sexual abuse. Parental absence, that's things like divorce, maybe one of your parents passed away, particularly parental suicide. Those things are hugely impactful for children, especially under the age of 8 years old. Emotional instability. Now, this is something, violence and emotional instability is probably the two things that impacted me the most. And it was the idea that I wasn't emotionally able to express myself, and I wasn't safe to be emotional about the things I was feeling. So I'd turn that into anger. But we'll get into that. Unpredictability. That's a huge one. A lot of the people I speak to, they had childhoods where they didn't know if they were safe. They didn't know if they were going to be financially safe, physically safe, emotionally. Maybe they moved around a lot, those sort of things. And something else, which is not super common as well, but it is very impactful, and that's neglect. Imagine in the earliest years of your life, the people that are supposed to love you and care for you the most neglect you. Those things are huge, 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 huge. So those are some of the typical experiences that I find in our world, in our type of people. Not common, but typical amongst those of us who go through these crises. Now, those experiences then turn into these beliefs. Now, as you can see, I've got two different types. There's the I ams, the internal beliefs about who you are, and then the other ones, which are the external ones. So, and these are very typical ones, and it's that I am not safe. I am not physically or emotionally safe in my household. I'm not loved. That's fundamental. Imagine a child not feeling loved. What's that going to do to somebody? I am alone. That's a scary thing for a child. When you're alone, you're vulnerable. When you're vulnerable, there is no safety. And I am broken. Maybe you formed a belief when you were a child because of something that happened to you that it was your fault, that fundamentally it's because you are broken. And this is the kind of person who you are going to be forever. You're perpetually a victim, right? And sometimes the victim mindset doesn't look like what you think it does. And then you can look at some beliefs about the world, right? Relationships don't last. Things went wrong with my parents or me and my siblings, for example. There is not enough. That might be a finite, limited mindset. Maybe you lived in abject poverty when you were a child, and you didn't get the things that other people had. And that, I can't trust people. Like I said, fundamentally, those caregivers, the people taking care of you can't trust them because they're going to betray you, or they're going to hurt you or abuse you or neglect you or leave you. Those are huge, huge, significant beliefs, I think, in the mind of a child. And if they're seated in the mind of a child, they're going to be with you forever until you can go back and do the significant amount of work that it takes to get over these beliefs. So I'm skimming over some of this stuff, but that's for a reason. I'm going to talk about some of these things in a lot more depth later on. Now, as you guys know, if you've followed my work for a while, you know that I believe that there are three fundamental questions we're always asking ourselves, and it's, am I worthy? Do I belong? And do I matter? And I think that we're asking ourselves those questions from a child, and sometimes we get told directly or indirectly by people or the world the answer to these questions. Now, given some of those behaviors that you've seen and then some of the beliefs, these are some of the beliefs that can result from those experiences. Sorry, not behaviors, experiences. And it's that you are not worthy. It's that you don't belong and that you don't matter. Now, I want you to mull over the significance of telling that to a child. For those of you who've got children, I want you to imagine saying this to your child. You're not worthy. You don't belong. You don't matter. And what an impact that would have on that child about their beliefs about themselves and about you and about the world, right? And some of us in the military first responder world have been told that. These are our beliefs. And this is how I come to these conclusions, because this is my shit. I've worked through this stuff, guys. I've been there. I've done it. Now, as you can see, I've not posed that as a question. It's gone straight to a statement. It's the I am that I do not, right? So then I always believe that for every belief that's a bad belief, there is a correct belief. And we know this. I think we inherently know this. So we inherently should know that I need to be worthy. I should be worthy, right? Because I am worthy. But because we've already had that belief put on us that we're not worthy, for example, we then have this counter belief where it's like, well, I've got to go and find worth. I have to go and become worthy. And I think that's a perfectly natural thing for us to do. And I think it's a good thing because it shows us that there are certain universal truths that we should pursue in our lives. And we pursue them in different ways. But the world and the universe and people have told us the opposite. Now, I think inherently we know those are lies, hence why we pursue the opposite. So, yeah, I need to be worthy. I need to belong somewhere, and I need to matter. Those are huge, huge beliefs. So let's have a little look at what that looks like in terms of a behavior for a child. I think, and again, I'm not going to go into this too much because I will in later videos, but I think as a child, we look for competence. We look for a skill. I've got to do. I have to do something. I need to have or show a behavior or learn a behavior that's going to make me worthy. And we make the mistake of pursuing competence over capacity, which is a whole other video in itself. Now, the competence as a child could be simple things like pursuing sport, looking for hobbies, or maybe even obsessions over movies, for example, or art or anything, or even obsession over sport and hobbies, for example. And here comes the community part, right? That's the do I belong? Now, that's when we look for things like friend groups, trying to fit in. We can fall into things like peer pressure, bullying, risk-taking behaviors, those sort of things. And the last one is significance. I need to feel important. And that's the do you matter? Do I matter question. So if you want to matter, you want to feel significant. And again, with the community thing, I think the real thing is to look for connection. And the significance, I think we should be looking for how to contribute. And I think the competence, community, significance is almost the trap. It's like the surface level for what you should be looking at. And if we stay at that surface level, that's the trap, because you'll always be pursuing the wrong things for the wrong reasons. But again, another video for another day. And then, so for the significance part for a child, the do I matter thing, it's like, well, I need to have good school grades, or I need to achieve in my sport, or I've got to go and get a university degree, or I've got to be better at, surfing or belonging to my friend group or whatever it is. And as you can tell, these three things are all very much tied in, and each of these questions bleeds into the next one. It's a very circular sort of process that you go through in your head. Now, for a child who wants competence, community, and significance, where do you think you're going to find this? Ta-da! The military and the first responder world, our world, the places we've ended up looking for the same stuff that we were looking for when we were a child, right? You find that. You've got competence, you've got community, you've got significance. So surface level, you're ticking all the boxes that you perceived that you were lacking when you were a child. You found it. And that's an amazing thing, right? At first, until things go wrong, right? You've scratched the surface, but maybe you go a bit deeper when the surface level stuff gets taken away, and then you're still left with that gap, right? But let's not go too much into that. Let's have a little look-see. And I love this. I've only just discovered this quote recently, actually, when I was researching this presentation. So this John Connolly guy, he's an Irish novelist, and he writes these books and often explores themes about trauma, psychological trauma in early years and how that impacts us later. But for in every adult, there dwells the child that was, and in every child there lies the adult that will be. Now, if we're talking about a circular process, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? I'm a child. I want to be X, Y, Z. I want to be this particular kind of adult. You grow up and you become that adult. But essentially, you're still looking for the same stuff as when you were a child. You're the same person. You're still looking for the same stuff. Maybe you're doing it in a healthy way, maybe you're not, right? But we're always going through that little cycle. Now, let's talk about experiences in the military first responder world, very typical ones, right? You'll see a lot of death. Maybe you'll take part in that and you'll do some killing. You will experience violence towards yourself, other people. Maybe you'll perpetrate the violence. There is always a threat to life in these kind of jobs. You're going to see all sorts of human misery. Man, I got a lot of cop mates that left the military and went to the cops. Man, I got no interest in that level of human misery. I do not want to subject myself to that or my family. So, the significance of that is not to be understated. Organizational betrayal. Your organization seemingly is against you, or you're hitting administrative or bureaucratic roadblocks. That's a huge one, right? Maybe you do get physically injured, or there's always the threat of physical injury. And abuse, there is all sorts of abuse. There's emotional abuse, physical, sexual, and you're going to see that. You might experience it. Maybe you'll even perpetrate it against other people in those kind of jobs. And those are some of the very typical experiences we have in this world. So then what does that look like in terms of a belief, right? And I think this is one mostly for cops, fireys and ambos, and it's that society is broken. You see the worst parts of society. If that's all you're seeing all day, well, how is that not going to affect your belief? How are you not going to think that society's fucked up and broken, right? And then you've got that I am belief. I'm not safe. I'm always in danger. There could be somebody with a gun, or maybe my patient will attack me, or, any house could burn down at any moment, or I've got to go into the fire, for example. Maybe the violence is normal, right? The way that you solve problems and deal with issues is through violence, or you see that happening. Maybe violence is your mechanism, like in the military, right? There's no negotiators in the military. There are in the cops. There's none in the military, right? That I know of anyway. So violence is the answer. And that you are alone. Maybe you do go through some organizational betrayal, or some of the experiences that you're having and the beliefs, some of the experiences you're having are not common amongst the people that you know and you love. And you think, holy fuck, they don't understand any of this. They don't have any idea what my life is like. How do you explain some of these things when you go home to your wife and your children or your family, what you've seen and what you've done? So then these beliefs start to form inside, right? And other people don't see them forming. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but they're there. They're happening, right? I can't trust anyone. My organization's going to betray me. Anybody on the street could betray me. Maybe I'll step on an IED. Maybe we're going to get shot at. Right? These are the sort of beliefs that you're going to start to have if you have very acute experiences, or you've had those experiences over and over and over again. And then I am insignificant. Maybe you thought you were going to go and save the world. Maybe through lack of opportunity, through illness or injury, or you were kicked out of the job or whatever it was, that you never had the chance to go and fulfill those needs that you were looking for in that job. The significance, am I worthy? Do I belong? Do I matter? Maybe you got told no again by your organization. So then you feel like, fuck, I'm not worthy. I don't belong. I don't matter. And you get told these things again, right? So then what are some of the typical behaviors? And these I've written down what I think is some of the most common behaviors that I've seen in my experience, my personal experience and the experience of talking to people that I encounter. Infidelity is a huge one, huge one in these jobs. You put, particularly in the cops, fireys, cops, ambos, you put men and women together and make them go through adverse circumstances and they trauma bond together and they, learn to trust each other through adversity. Of course, they're going to bond with each other and they're going to form relationships. And, sometimes if, for example, you go home and you can't speak to your partner about what you experience at your work, but you can to the people at your work, and maybe they're other men and women, you are going to form relationships, and sometimes they're going to turn physical because that emotional that emotional understanding that you no longer have with your family, you've got with the person at your work. I think that's a big part of infidelity, but also I think it's a validation exercise for some of us. That was a big thing for me, was infidelity. It's how my relationship ended. Isolation is huge. We isolate ourselves from that community. We isolate ourselves from our family, our friends, society, all sorts of reasons. Anger, that's just emotional protection. We don't know how to deal with our emotions because we got shut down when we were kids. We can't use our emotions in some of those emergency situations we find ourselves in. So why would we address it later on? Because emotions are weak and they stop me being good at my job. So we use anger instead. Anger is a useful tool. Anger turns into violence. No, I use violence to solve situations and resolve things. Suicide. It's the ultimate one. There's a million reasons for suicide, which I don't really need to get into today. We all know them, but suicide is a byproduct behavior of the experiences and beliefs that you've had. Maybe, for example, you've had a million bad experiences and you believe that society's broken, you're broken, there's no getting better, no one understands, everything's fucked. Where's the hope in that? Where's the, hey, I want to stick around and be alive for longer and be here for my family? Where's the hope in that? Of course, people kill themselves if that's what they believe. Alcohol abuse, great way to numb your emotions. Just look for that high, have some fun, get rid of those inhibitions, excuse some of your bad behaviors. Divorce, very typical. You start to lose connection with your family. You bond more with the people at your work. You want to do your job more because you're trying to fill that void, maybe. And then violence. If we use violence as a tool in those jobs, and if that's acceptable to us there, why wouldn't it be acceptable in other parts of our life? I spent 12 years in the military, and although I never killed anybody, I have perpetrated violence. I thought about killing every day for 12 years, every day, every single day. I've had opportunities to do it. I've gone on deployments and thought about doing it and tried to do it. So, of course, I still think about violence all the time. I still think about killing people in certain situations. I think that's a very normal, natural thing for people like us to go through, but it's not acceptable. So let me finish on this little quote from Carl Jung. And Carl Jung is a psychologist from the early 20th century, or maybe late 19th century. But I am not what happens to me. I am what I choose to become. So I'm going to leave you on that one, right? That quote, apart from when I do a little outro bit. And I want you to think about that. I want you to think that you are not what happened to you, and a lot of stuff has happened to you. Maybe you don't give it the credence that it deserves. Maybe you don't think that your childhood was traumatic or impactful, right? Because maybe you didn't go through the typical things that I just put there on the screen with violence and abuse and neglect or whatever, but maybe I'll have to phrase it in a different way for you to understand, but I want you to understand that a lot of things did happen to you to get you to this point where you're watching my videos, where you feel the need to watch my videos. We've all been through mostly the same stuff. We've all got mostly the same beliefs. We've all got mostly the same behaviors that lead us into these crises. And then that further perpetuates and brings us into more of those experiences. We then start to make the experiences, which then perpetuates our belief, and then our behaviors follow on. And it's just a vicious cycle, right? So I'm here to try and help people break that cycle first by clarity, so understanding what it is. Now, I hope that that's what I've given you today in this 20 odd minutes of this presentation. I know it's a bit boring, and I'm going to endeavor to make these more interesting and put more pictures and maybe some graphics and whatnot. But long story short, guys, you can change. I'm telling you, this was more of an informative presentation as opposed to me telling you how to do something about it. And we'll get into that later on. But that's it for today, right? And I want to thank you guys for watching this presentation, because my mission is to prevent suicide and crisis in the military and first responder community. It's to stop you, me, people like us killing ourselves. I'm fucking sick of watching it. And further to that, guys, if you do want to support me in my mission, I do offer keynote speaking. That is what I do. That's the official business offering of the Origin Initiative. And I want to speak to you guys. I want to help you people. I want to stand up in front of your organization and give you as much as I possibly can of my experience and my knowledge and the things that I've done, so that you can get over this shit and you can go back to living your lives the way that you'd like to and the way that you're supposed to. So please, guys, reach out to me in the bio. If you're on Instagram, make a comment, share the reels, the videos, whatever it is. Go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And guys, thank you so much for supporting my mission and for watching my videos. Plenty more to come.